Well, hello once again. This is Peter Scovert, Music is a Journey, and this is my second thread that I'm doing this weekend. It's getting pretty hot in here. This is the one room in the house without air conditioning, and it's a pretty warm day in June. So today's second thread, the previous one I did was one for Ed's channel on my turntable. It is all about female artists. You can go over and have a look at that video if you like. But this one here is for MGK Boston, a fellow Canadian who is living in Boston. I'm a Canadian who's living in Japan. And MGK Boston decided that he was going to ask us to talk about 5 albums from 1985. Alright, so usually at the beginning of every year I tackle albums from some decades back. So for example, 2024 I did albums from 1974 and another video on albums from 1984. Probably I did some from 94 as well. And next year, 2025, I will be doing albums from 75 and 85. So, MGK Boston is asking us to do 5 albums from 85. And at first I thought I'd like to keep them for my video in January. But then I thought, no, you know what? If I do some of them now, it will lessen the load in January. In fact, maybe I'll just do 10 albums in January, and then I can remove these from that list. So here we go, 1985. I finished grade 8 and began grade 9 in that year. And what was I listening to? Well, among many things, there were some exciting things happening in the music scene. For example, we had the debut album by Exodus coming out, Bonded in Blood. Exodus, of course, being part of the California thrash metal scene. Kirk Hammett of Metallica originally playing in this band. Took them a few years to get their debut out, but here it is, 1985. We've got great killer songs like Bonded by Blood and Exodus. Sounds like the band name and album title, as well as Piranha and a few other really good ones on here. I think this is one of the more intense thrash albums of the 80s. In fact, it seemed that when thrash metal first came out, it really was about being intense. Later on, it got to be a little bit more about including melodic parts and more technical parts and being a little bit more musically advanced. At this time, it was just simply about blasting everyone through the door. So, Exodus, Bonded by Blood from 1985. As well, from 1985, we take a look at the second album by Anthrax, Spreading the Disease, and the first album with Joe Belladonna on vocals. Of course, the album after this, Among the Living, was Anthrax's possibly most famous and best loved album, Among the Living, my favorite as well, but I always like this one, especially the opening track, AIR, is one of my favorite Anthrax songs, and overall this is just a really good East Coast thrash metal album from 1985. Let's head up north to Toronto and take a look at Razor, one of the big 4 in the Canadian thrash scene, along with Sacrifice, Voivod, and Annihilator. So this is Razor's album, Evil Invaders. Now, Razor are an interesting band because the lead vocalist for the first few albums was not really interested in being a thrash metal vocalist. He was more of a fan of David Lee Roth, I heard. And in fact, if you listen to some of his screaming abilities, it's like David Lee Roth coming back from hell. It's just got that really high, dry scream sound, but just much more intensity. But he also sings in a rather gruff voice usually, and this album here, Evil Invaders, was one of my favorites. Now, I've only heard actually 3 of Razor's 1980s albums. They are all heavy thrash metal, but apparently they didn't always do thrash metal, and there are a couple of albums out there that I have heard are not exactly thrash, particularly their debut, I think it was, Armed and Dangerous. So I've had that one in mind. I'll pick it up sometime, but there's just always so much to get. So anyway, Razor from 1985. Then, wow, very important album for 1985. This is Possessed's debut album, Seven Churches. Sometimes considered the beginning of death metal, partly because there is a song on here called Death Metal, also because the vocal style is more gruff than the thrash metal style. This is more of a roaring style of vocals rather than thrash metal's more kind of sharp barking sound. Of course, the other contender for first death metal album is Death's album Scream Bloody Gore from 2 years later. Also, people have said that both albums are not exactly death metal because they still have more of a thrash metal style musically. However, they are important steps, both of them, in the development towards death metal. And interestingly, I found out last year that there is another band who released an album in 1985, also with a song called death metal. It was a band from Brazil, but at the moment, I've forgotten who it was. Was it Volcano? Maybe. But anyway, Possessed Seven Churches, one of the legendary thrash albums from the 1980s and an important album in the beginning of the death metal scene. And finally, let's go back over to Canada, Toronto, and here we have Sacrifice and their debut album, Torment in Fire. Sacrifice, as I said, they are one of the big four of the Canadian thrash scene. This was their debut. They released 4 albums between 1985 and 1991, and then when the whole grunge scene came out and thrash metal seemed to lose popularity, they decided they were going to go off and do other things. They did regroup and record an album in the 2000s, and I have heard from someone commenting on one of my recent videos that Sacrifice have recorded a 6th album, which is due to be released later this year. So yay, I'm looking forward to that. This album here is of the thrash metal ilk, but it is a little bit darker. There are a little bit more gory type lyrics, a little more hellish type lyrics. There's a kind of Evil Dead influence on here, I think, or inspiration from the movie. So you could say it's thrash. You could also say it's a little closer to death metal, or maybe first wave black metal. Hard to say, but you know what? Around 1985-86, the terms thrash metal, speed metal, and death metal were being used interchangeably for the same band. So they hadn't really been pigeonholed yet into distinctive different styles. But anyway, there we go. Sacrifice, Torment and Fire from 1985, and those are 5 albums from 1985. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, MGK Boston. See you all in another video a little bit later on. Thanks everyone. Bye.